Welcome to another episode of Dad Up, everyone. Thank you guys very much for joining me. The individual that I have on today, he and I have gotten a chance to meet over the last several months, specifically towards coaching. And he was one of my clients, coaching him through, really leveling up his game as a dad. But I'm really excited to speak to his journey and for him to share his journey with you guys. He's become a good friend of mine, and I'm super thrilled that he has said yes to being on the show. So welcome to the show, Charlie.
Bryan, thanks so much for having me, man. I'm really excited for today's conversation.
Awesome, man. I've been looking forward to this, and we had a little bit of a hiccup the last time we tried to record. My internet just completely went out, and so this is kind of a redo. But the good news is we're redoing it, so it's going to be
Yes.
even better.
Yes.
So for my listeners who don't know who you are, let's talk a little bit about your upbringing and kind of how you grew up, and then how
Yeah,
you got into what you're doing now, obviously
for
with
sure.
your journey in the fitness world, but what you're doing now, and then obviously share your family as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Wisconsin. One brother, one sister, both younger, kind of small farm town community south of Madison, Wisconsin, called Monroe. All growing up, sports was a huge part of my life. Basketball all throughout, skiing, playing football, playing soccer, playing baseball. Just very active all year round. But when I was 9 years old, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And so that kind of changed things for me. It didn't prohibit me from being physically active. In fact, it made it even more important that I remained physically active. But there were a lot of considerations I had to take day in and day out that I really didn't have to up to that point. Specifically, like how much I'd be exercising and, around my nutrition, what I would be eating and everything like that. So that really kind of shaped a lot of my mindset going forward. Fortunately, my parents were incredibly supportive of me continuing to be active, continuing to, experience life as a young kid and then into high school and everything like that. So I never felt that I was at all restricted in what I could or couldn't do. In fact, I played basketball all through high school, and then I was fortunate enough to play basketball for 4 years in college as well. I went to a Division III school in Massachusetts called Williams College, where I played for 4 years. I had a really fun career there, and what I knew that I wanted to do, more or less like from the time I arrived on campus, is I knew that I wanted to help train people from an exercise perspective. And sports performance really was my thing. It was the thing that I was most interested in. I got into sports performance around 8th grade or so with myself, and then kind of bringing my brother and then his friends on board, and all through high school, training me, training him, training his friends. By the time I got into college, working with some of my teammates, and then working with, my entire basketball team, and then multiple teams on campus. By the time I was a senior in college, I had some really fun internships. One in San Diego, California, where I got to work with like Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers and LaDainian Tomlinson, and I mean that was an amazing summer. And after I graduated, I knew that again, like I wanted to be in the exercise sports performance world. I took a job in Chicago as a personal trainer. And I got introduced to some training techniques that I was unfamiliar with up to that point. And it really came at a critical time for me because even though like I was athletic, I was active, I was strong, my body was really breaking down. I put a lot of wear and tear, a lot of miles on my body. And because my identity was so tied into being an athlete, being strong and fit and everything like that, I decided not to sacrifice my identity of any of those things, but rather to continue to sacrifice my body and continue to exercise the way that I always had. But by the time I was 24 years old, I felt like I just couldn't keep it up anymore. And so like I said, fortunately, I had some kind of interventions along the way. One was the muscle activation techniques program, and the other is called the resistance training specialist program. That really changed in my mind kind of the role that our muscles play within our overall health and the role that exercise can play within our overall health. From there, I went into graduate school, really started studying the biochemistry and the cellular biology of how exercise helps us be healthier. And so I got a master's degree in exercise science. I graduated that in 2016. And from there, really put together the principles that my wife and I now utilize at our studio in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, working with our clients both in person and virtually, helping people exercise in a way that not only feels good for their body, that fits for their schedule, but truly incorporates all the necessary aspects to help them lead a healthier life. And so we run a podcast ourselves. So we kicked off in 2018. We've been doing it weekly, put together, a book that we released in 2021, and just have, a ton of content and a ton of fun, working with people and helping people exercise to be healthier.
Awesome. And let's talk about your kids. How many kids you got,
Yeah.
and what are their ages?
Yeah. So we have two kids. My daughter was born in 2019 and my son was born in 2021. So they are 4 and 2 at the time of this recording. They're amazing. I mean, they completely changed my world, and in different ways than I thought, but also more profoundly than I thought as well.
Mm, awesome. Thinking back to your childhood, I know that, just putting the diabetes aside, but thinking back to your childhood when you were, active and playing all these different sports, did you know back then that one day you wanted to own your own gym, or that just kind of happened as you went along in your journey?
So that idea really got cemented in my head during my freshman year of college. Going into college, I knew that I wanted sports to be a part of my life. And actually, I thought, hey, maybe I'd be like a sports psychologist or something like that. So actually, my freshman year, my first semester, I took the Psych 101 course, did horribly in it. And I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe it was just that course. Maybe I'll try, another course second semester. And that didn't go so hot either. So I realized, okay, yeah, the psychology route is not going to be my route, at least from an academic perspective. But by that time, the idea of not only of training, but actually like owning and operating my own business was something that I was really keen on. So then I actually switched my undergraduate focus to economics, and then graduated with a degree in economics.
All right. Now, when it comes to you and your wife, because I know you and your wife own the gym together.
Yes.
You both are trainers there, so that's what she does too.
Yes.
How did you guys meet, and was that part of the discussion as well?
Yeah. So we met in 2012 in a continuing education course for personal trainers, the resistance training specialist program that I brought up. She was living in Naples, Florida. I was living in Chicago, and this course was happening in Columbus, Ohio. And we just both happened to be at that course. There's maybe 20, 25 people in the course. And we were 2 of the younger ones. And so we actually connected about kind of the muscle activation techniques courses, and she was deciding whether or not like she should continue to pursue those. I was just finishing up like the introductory level of that program, and so I was kind of talking to her about my experience with that, and so then we just kind of kept that conversation going after that weekend, and yeah, and then so that's kind of how that started.
Okay. When you're talking about the muscle activation technique, what can you be a little bit more specific on what that entails? I'm really curious, just for my own benefit, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So, okay. So first of all, let me say like, MAT is it's a specific system, that is kind of copyrighted and trademarked. So there's parts that I can kind of generally describe, and then there's a lot of details that I can't talk about all that much. So it's developed by Greg Roskoff, who's based out of Denver, Colorado. And the whole, one of the big premises of muscle activation techniques, is the idea that like when your muscles stop working well, meaning your muscles are supposed to be receiving a signal from your central nervous system to contract, okay? But at times that signal can get disrupted. And when that signal gets disrupted, the muscle's ability to contract gets disrupted. And that can present itself as a number of different symptoms, whether it's muscle tightness, whether it's weakness, whether it's a lack of awareness of certain areas of the body, whether it's a deficiency in range of motion, like you're not able to move as well as you once did, or one side of your body moves differently than another side, okay? And so when that is the case, with MAT, instead of looking and saying, okay, well, like you can only lift your arm to say like here or whatever, for the for people listening on audio, you can't reach your arm all the way up overhead. Instead of looking and saying, oh, that means, things on the back side of your body are too tight, it's saying, okay, well, maybe things on the front side of your body are too weak. And then by going and addressing the things that are too weak, what we see is not only does range of motion improve, but the stuff that feels symptomatically tight actually starts to improve as well. And meaning like the symptoms of tightness start to go away. And so we see increases in force output, we see improvements in range of motion, and we see a huge change in people's symptoms when they get their muscles working as well as they should. So an analogy that I kind of like to describe is if you have a Lamborghini and you have this giant engine, but the battery cables are disconnected. Okay. And Greg uses this analogy as well. Okay. You can have this giant engine, but you're not going to be able to access any of it because the battery cables are disconnected. However, as soon as you reconnect those battery cables and make sure they're tight, boom, instantly, all the horsepower, all the torque, everything that's built into the engine, you can access. Okay. And so with MAT, we're going around and trying to find where the battery cables are disconnected, where they're kind of too loose, reconnecting that, reestablishing that signal from the central nervous system to the muscles themselves. And boom, all the strength, all the endurance, everything that you've built with your training, now you can go about accessing it.
Got it. Okay. Would that mean that a lot of your clients would be older or elderly, or does that have an effect on younger clients as well?
That's a great question. So it's for my clientele, it ends up being very mixed. Okay, so I'll have clients who are high school age that are that are more athletic, and either they just like rolled their ankle and they're like, okay, cool, I need to get my foot muscles, my ankle muscles, my hip muscles, and everything like that working better, so I can get back to playing. It might be something like that. It could be an athlete who is trying to help their body recover faster between workouts or between games, or it could be somebody who is kind of past their athletic prime, so to speak, and they're starting to feel the effects of what we commonly call aging. They're like, yeah, I don't like the way my body's feeling when I wake up in the morning. I don't like the aches. I don't like the tweaks, everything like that. And so we help get their body tuned up, kind of keep their body functioning well. And then we can progress them through traditional exercise from there.
Okay. And so and I'm asking you a lot of questions just because I'm really curious, but with that MAT, what you call muscular activation or
muscle activation
techniques.
Techniques. Yep.
So through the MAT, it's not so much of working out with weights and things like that. It's more of understanding and working through body movement. And
yes, exactly. So with MAT, it's done like on a massage table. It's a hands-on type of modality, and so it doesn't necessarily involve like using weights or anything like that. It's more about that reconnection of kind of that mind muscle connection, kind of again like that reconnecting the battery cables to for the engine to be able to access all that.
Got it. So there's probably not a lot of gyms out there that really focus on that, right? I mean,
you're right. So yeah, so Chicago is a little bit of a denser population, but if you're looking at number of gyms versus number of gyms that have MAT, it's a very small percentage.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's awesome. Well, that's very cool. I may talk to you more about it offline, because that's
for sure
something that's very interesting and intriguing, and maybe something that I should be incorporating into my own workouts as well. So very cool.
Totally.
Now,
yeah.
When you were growing up playing all these sports, when it comes to parenting in general, were your parents involved in the sports that you played? Did your dad coach, things like that?
Yeah, very, very involved. So my dad coached, especially from a basketball perspective. I mean, from the time, it was like dribbling dinosaurs, so like, kindergarten and before, all the way up, kind of into high school. Once we got into high school, then we had our high school coaches. But he was with us every step of the way from there. My mom didn't necessarily have a background in basketball, but I mean, she was our biggest supporters, every single practice, every single game, tournaments, all over the country, wherever, she was there for us 100%.
Oh, that's awesome. So you had a
Yeah.
very involved parents, and clearly a very good relationship with your parents. And
Yeah.
they've probably taught you a lot, not only from, the person being the person who you are, but also when it comes to parenting and how to parent your own kids. What kind of
Mhm.
lessons did you learn from your parents that maybe you use today with your own kids?
Man, so from my mom, I learned so much about like caring for people,
Mm,
and really making sure that like your people know that they are cared for,
mhm.
and making sure that your people know that they are special to you, and they are meaningful to you. And that was something that was just, I mean, it was so obvious with her just how much, she loved me and my siblings. She loved our friends. I mean, the number of kids we would have over at our house on any given day, and she just loved all of it. And so that was something that really, really stood out for me. And she worked really, really hard at making sure that we were able to do that, and making sure that, we felt supported with those things, and that everybody felt welcome. My dad, I learned a ton of stuff from, a work ethic perspective. So my dad is a physician, and I remember, I mean, he wouldn't be home until like 8:30. It felt like a lot of nights. And I remember I was 13 years old, and I was at an after school program, doing some volunteering. And all of a sudden it's like 4:45, 4:50, and like people start packing up, and lights start getting turned off and stuff. And I'm like, where's everybody going? Like, are they taking a late lunch? Like, what's going on? And then like 5:15, like it's cleared out, like nobody's there anymore. And I'm thinking to myself, where'd everybody go? And it never occurred to me. I was 13 years old. It never occurred to me that the workday was supposed to end at 5,
Huh.
because my example was my dad didn't get home until 7:30, 7:45, 8, 8:30. And that was like Monday through Friday. And, my friends would be over. It'd be a Friday night. They'd be like, "Where's your dad?" I'm like, "He's working." Like, where else would, like, why wouldn't he be working? Like, why wouldn't somebody be working right now? And it was never perceived as like, oh, my dad works a lot. Like, I never, it would, that like that was just normal. And so that was my context. That was my framework of like, okay, cool. Like, that's just what you're supposed to do. But here's the crazy thing is, like I said, he coached us all throughout. All right. So we would have tournaments where we would have to, drive an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours or whatever to get to the tournament. And so he would get up, like, I don't even know what time he would get up to get to the hospital, to round on his patients, to get back in time so we could get in the car and drive, however far to get to our games, to coach us all day, taking calls in between the games to make sure like his patients are okay. I never felt like he missed anything, even though I also knew that he was like very aware of how much, or as aware as I could be, of how much he was working. And so that really pressed upon me, not only like a work ethic, but this understanding of like, you can do both. Like,
Mhm.
you can work extremely hard at something and also like fully support your family, to the best of your ability.
Yeah. So he was one of those dads that he was intentional with the things that he was doing. So if he's in his business or at work at the hospital, whatever, he's intentional. That's
Mm-hmm.
his goal. That's where his focus is. But when it came to coaching you or being there for you and your siblings, he was intentional with that time as well. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned about him just getting up early to go into the hospital early so he could leave early. That was
Mm-hmm.
literally what I did with my boys. There were
Mm-hmm.
many times where I had to be, because I coached their sports teams as well, and I did all the way up through high school. There were many times that I had to be, I had to leave work early to go to a game, that we had a game and we had to be
Mhm.
at, that was a ways away. And I would go into the office at 4 a.m. So that way I could leave at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock so I could make sure that I was there to coach them.
Mhm.
So you just make those sacrifices. Yes, I sacrificed a little bit of sleep, but my sleep was not as important as my kids were. So I wanted to make sure that I was there for my business and I wasn't letting anything slack there. And I wanted to make sure that I was there for my kids. And so I made those sacrifices, and it sounded like your dad did the same thing. So that's awesome. And
Yeah.
you guys, knowing you and through the coaching and stuff that you and I have done together, working together, seeing the areas that you're trying to be intentional in when it comes to your business and your family, um, it shows that he had an impact on you in that area. You really are a person that wants to be sincere, genuine, whatever you want to call it, with being focused and being intentional with your family. You really are that individual, that type of dad or husband. And it's because of the example that you had growing up,
Mhm.
not only with your
Mhm.
mom loving on you and loving on your friends like they were her own kids, but the fact that your dad was so intentional with you, just it kind of laid the groundwork of who you are as a husband and a father as well. That's awesome. Um, I want to shift gears a little bit, talking about your kids.
Yeah.
You and I have talked a little bit about this before, but mentioning that you were as it diagnosed with diabetes, type 1
Mhm.
diabetes at the age of 9. My
Mhm.
wife was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 7.
Mhm.
And she had to make a lot of shifts. She had to make a lot of adjustments to her lifestyle
Mhm.
as a young child, and she didn't really always understand it. But here she is several years later. If I said her age on the air, she would kill me. But several years later, and she's just accustomed to it. It's just who she is,
Mhm.
and it's just a part of her of who she is.
Yeah.
And so yeah, those adjustments that she had to make, she had to learn to do and manage through it as best she can. For
Mhm.
you being a type 1 diabetic, my wife played sports, you played sports. You addressed it in the beginning there about how those adjustments you had to make in order
Mhm.
to play sports. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that is a big deal. And this could be for parents that maybe have a child who was just diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic that loves playing sports. Just because they're a type 1 diabetic doesn't mean they can't live a normal life, doesn't mean they
Right.
can't enjoy the things that kids should enjoy, like playing sports or being a dancer, dance recitals, things like that, or a ballerina, whatever it is they want to do.
Mhm.
For you, how much of that did that have an impact on you? Because it can be hard for kids to understand that. So maybe talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
to help parents understand, the challenges they're going to face.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, sports was never seen as something that I couldn't do. And I remember the day that I got diagnosed, one of the very
So
first
does my
things that
wife.
yeah, yeah. One of the very first things I was told was, "Don't worry, you're still going to be able to play basketball." Like in that little phrase, little sentence alone, it was like, okay, cool. Like everything's going to be okay, right? And so, I mean, that's the mind of a 9-year-old, right? So I was never made to feel like I couldn't do something. Uh, but what I learned very early on is, as a type 1 diabetic, uh, there are some consequences if you don't plan accordingly. Okay. And really, I mean, for the most part, when it comes to exercise, the big thing is like dropping too low, right? And
Mhm.
so it's like, okay, all right, wow, like you experience that once and you're like, okay, how do I not experience that again? Not only because like it doesn't feel great while it's happening, but also because then you got to sit out for like 15, 20, 30 minutes when all your other friends are out playing. And it's like, come on, like I want to keep playing. Right. And so it's like, okay, cool. So like, what can I do to make sure that I can keep playing and that this doesn't happen again? So it's like you experience that once. It's like, all right, we need some systems in place. And so I won't say that like things became like super regimented, but I definitely became a lot more mindful of, all right, this is what I'm going to eat. This is when I'm going to eat it because I'm going to be working out at this time or I've practiced at this time. These are the things that I need to have with me at all times, whether it's like juice boxes and crackers or whatever it is. And so you start to develop this skill of planning, of thinking ahead, of really trying to not just think about what you're going to be doing the next hour, but think about, okay, what am I going to be doing, 5 hours from now? What am I going to be doing 8 hours from now? What do I need to do now in order to make sure that I can do that? And kind of one of the blessings in disguise of that whole thing is that translates into more than just exercise and diabetes. That translates into so much of what you do in life, being able to plan and think ahead and everything like that. So for parents that have children who are type 1 diabetic, the biggest, in my opinion, one of the biggest things is to, and it's way easier said than done, but to not be scared of them going out and doing things, of them, being physically active, of playing sports, of everything like that. Again, it's a lot easier said than done, but for me, that allowed me to develop such a discipline for my own body and for my mind of how I was going to go about constructing my days and the things that I was going to need to do. And again, like planning things ahead, that those skills now have carried over really into so many aspects and areas of my life.
Yeah, it teaches you a lot, and you're learning those things at a very young age that, most people don't pick up until they're into their adult life and
Sure.
realizing that, oh no, my health isn't on track and I need to learn how to take better care of myself, but
Mhm.
I'm not real good with planning. I'm not real good with putting things on my schedule to do these things. Now this is going to have to be something that I have to learn to do.
Yeah.
Whereas, yeah, your child is diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic, and they're going to have to learn those things and how to make those adjustments at a very young age. That's only setting them up to really be able to do it successfully
Yep.
when they're an adult and life really hits them on the chin, right?
Yep. Yep. Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When it comes to, being a type 1 diabetic, one of the biggest fears that my wife and I had, and I know you and I have talked about this, but I want you to talk a little bit about it. One of
Yeah.
the biggest fears that my wife and I had with her being a type 1 diabetic was our boys becoming a
Hmm.
diabetic.
Yeah.
And we went through a series of a period of time where we were having them tested every so often just to make sure that everything was okay. And it's still, I mean, they're adults now, but it's still, you can still develop type 1 diabetes
Sure.
into your adult life. But
Yeah.
that was a very big part of our, worry as parents that, hey, yeah, this could happen. How did you guys manage through that, or how are you guys dealing with that right now? And I ask
Yeah.
that because maybe there are parents out there that are watching this that are type 1 diabetics and they have that little fear in the back
Sure.
of their mind. Can you
Absolutely.
talk a little bit about that with respect to you and your wife?
Yeah, totally. So, I mean, before my kids were born, I would say that that was a tremendous fear for me. Before I met my wife, if you would have asked me if I would have wanted to have kids, I would have genuinely said like I don't know, like either no or I don't know for that very reason. Because in my head, the only way that I can prevent passing it on is if I don't have kids, and so it was as simple as that in my mind. Um, and so when my daughter was born, it's like, just holding your breath until that first blood test comes back. And you're like, okay, she's good. It's like, oh, thank goodness. Okay. And then same thing when my son was born. It was like, oh, first blood test come back. Okay, he's good. Okay, thank goodness. All right. Um, it crosses my mind. It still crosses my mind. There are still there are a lot fewer times when it crosses my mind now. And um in part because if something were to happen, I feel confident enough in the current technology and in my ability to help guide them and that I know for a fact that they would be able to live a completely full and from the outside looking in normal life. I know that for a fact. Okay. Um, the concern that I would have is like, okay, how would they handle it emotionally? Because you can do like, the facts and figures and the technology and the data, all that stuff and be like, yeah, like you're good and stuff. But like, how would they carry that emotionally? And so for me, it's like, okay, if something comes up, I need to make sure that I am mentally in a position to be able to like fully support them and just be there for them on that front 100%. And so yeah, it's still something that crosses my mind. You do, we took certain precautions as far as like cord blood banking, cord tissue banking, everything like that, in case something were to come up and the technology is there that can be a useful way to help mitigate something. But at the end of the day, where I'm sitting today, whatever is going to happen is going to happen, and I can do my best to make sure that my kids eat well and they manage their stress and they do their best to sleep well and they're active and everything like that. I'll do all the lifestyle stuff to promote a healthy lifestyle and to promote a healthy mind and to promote mental emotional regulation and everything like that, and like fully love on them and fully support them, everything like that. And after all that, something still may happen, and I have to be okay with that. And I think I can sit here and have this conversation with you right now and say that if all that happens and something still happens, I'd be like, okay, well then that's what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So at this moment, the benefits of having kids, from the experiences and the love and the connection and everything like that, with only been a father for just over 4 years now, far outweighs the concern that I had of like, okay, well, what if something comes up, and far outweighs the any kind of thoughts in my mind from a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis of, okay, what if something comes up. And so I would, if I could do it all again, I would do it the exact same way, understanding that there are only a certain amount of things that I can control, and whether or not my kid develops type 1 diabetes, I don't know if that's one of them, but I can control how active they are, how much love they feel, how what, to a certain extent, like the things that they're eating, how supported they feel, trying to coach them, to make sure that they're able to manage their stress, their sleep, everything that we just talked about. You can only control those things to the best of our ability. Right now when they're 4 and 2, we'll see when they're 14 and 12. But but that being said, yeah, I mean that's just kind of where I'm at now, where it was on my mind all the time, and now it's not as much.
Yeah. I think, with the advancements in technology, and it's only going to continue to grow as far as dealing with type 1 diabetes. I think it's come a long way. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I can remember my wife didn't have an insulin pump, and the first time they came out, this was many, many, many years ago. My older son he's 24 now, so he was probably 2, maybe something like that when she got the first pump, and she didn't want to do it because she was so used to the lifestyle that she had, and she was so used to just giving herself shots constantly and checking her blood sugar constantly, that she didn't want to make that change. It was something new that she had to learn, even though she's already gone through the last 20 years of her life, almost 20 years of her life, living a certain way. So now there's this shift where she's got to learn something new. But you could ask her today, she'll tell you today, I'm so thankful that I did that I learned how to use a pump and got the pump, because it's really changed my life. And so I say that in that, yeah, technology's come a long ways, and there's so many more things that are happening with treatment and learning and knowing your blood sugars and learning how to function through your blood sugars when you're doing different things or eating different things. The technology is amazing now. And so for kids that may have just been diagnosed as diabetic, the things that they have at their fingertips right now to help manage type 1 diabetes is so
Yeah,
much better than when you were younger or my wife was younger.
absolutely.
So yeah, that's cool. I think when I think about parents dealing with a child that may be a type 1 diabetic, one of the things that I think about for parents is the adjustments they have to make, not only in their schedules, but also their routines as a family. So changing their eating habits and stuff like that. I know that my wife, when she was younger, her mom made her specific meals. And sometimes those meals were a little different than what everybody else was eating, but sometimes they weren't. Sometimes she kept them pretty much the same. But having to really help her change her diet and monitoring that, as my mother-in-law monitored it very closely because she wanted to make sure she was staying on top of things. That can be tough for a kid, because a kid goes to school, they see their friends and they're eating the treats and they're eating this stuff and they're doing this stuff, and she couldn't do that stuff, or she had to make adjustments to insulin in order to do those kinds of things, right? For parents that are having a child that is struggling with making those types of lifestyle changes with their diet and stuff like that, what advice can you give to them? And I ask you that because I know what you're going to say, but I ask you it because kids can still live a normal life and they can still enjoy those things. But I want to hear it from you. Being a type 1 diabetic, I want your perspective on that for parents that might be dealing with a child that is just frustrated with how they have to eat and live.
Yeah. Okay. So we take my kids to the park, right? And I watch my son climb, and I watch him climb, and I think, goodness gracious, if that boy goes any higher, he's going to slip and fall, right? And so from the outside looking in, like, it's very easy to see, like, oh, when somebody's getting too close to the edge. But if I go and I try to pull him down, he gets pissed. He gets upset. He's like, no. And what happens when I set him back down on the ground? He goes back up to climbing, right?
Right.
So the thing for me to not do is to keep trying to pull him down, because it's just going to make him more upset. The thing that I can do that he actually really grows to like is when I support him and help him go higher than he could go on his own, and make sure that he is safe the entire time he's doing that. So how does this relate to kids and their food? Look, you're not going to be there every single second with your kid. Okay. You can do your absolute best to teach your kids how to eat in a way that is maybe most congruent for, healthy long-term outcomes for a type 1 diabetic. But at the end of the day, the kid just wants to live. The kid just wants to feel normal, and the kid just wants to feel like they are one of their friends. And you can do other things where, you're substituting the regular sugar for the fake sugar, or the regular soda for the diet soda, or whatever. You can go through all that. And that can be, part of the game plan. But you can also teach the kid how to be able to enjoy those things in moderation. And you can also approach it with the understanding that there are going to be days where the kid eats more than he or she should and doesn't give him or herself enough insulin, and they're running higher than they should. There are going to be days where their blood sugar drops low because things get miscalculated, or things don't seem to get miscalculated, and they're just having a type 1 diabetic day and things go for a whack. That just happens. And so if you are trying to approach a 9-year-old, 11-year-old, 13-year-old, 15-year-old from the perspective of a 35, 40, 45-year-old mind, and being like, well, why can't you see it, how I'm seeing it? That's just going to lead to nothing but conflict. And from my experience, from type 1 diabetics I've talked to and parents that I've talked to, it ends up in more rebellion than it does like going, okay, yeah, like them just like stopping altogether and being like, okay, yeah, like I'm only going to eat, carrots and chicken or whatever. Right. So you have to understand that the kid is going to do their absolute best to live their life. That's kind of part of their mission, is they are just going to do their best to live their life, to feel like a normal kid, to do all the things that they want to do. And if you can teach them how to do that responsibly within some kind of measures, then that will be far more beneficial for the kid long term than trying to impose strict guidelines on them. They're trying to impose, you can't eat this, you can only eat that. Because not only do they feel alienated in that way, but now all of a sudden there's like no leeway in that system. The other thing you gotta have to remember is like, kind of like what I was talking about, like, hey, the first time I had a low blood sugar and I realized that I would have to sit out playing with my friends for the next 15 to 30 minutes. I don't want that to happen again. Like when kids feel lousy because they manage their sugar, their insulin or whatever, they can kind of learn that like, okay, like I don't want to feel that way again. I'm not saying that you allow that to happen or you encourage that to happen,
Right.
but also understand that is kind of part of the whole learning process of like, okay, yeah, I know I feel a lot better when I do these things and I don't do these things.
Yeah. I love that. And that comes down to what you were saying before. It's just moderation. Our kids, listen, at the end of the day, your kid's not a type 1 diabetic and they're perfectly healthy. They still shouldn't eat all that sugary
Mm-hmm.
stuff. They still shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be eating that stuff because it's just an unhealthy lifestyle and they can still feel crappy eating that
Mm-hmm.
sugary stuff or, being overly tired because they didn't get enough sleep. So
Mm-hmm.
even not having diabetes can still have an impact on you when you do the stuff that you really shouldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
However, keeping in mind, living through life and eating things or enjoying things in moderation is something that, hey, it just shows that, yeah, you can live a normal life being a type 1 diabetic or not being a diabetic. You can live a normal life and enjoy the things that we like to enjoy, the stuff that's not necessarily healthy for us,
Mm-hmm.
but doing things on the flip side to make sure that our lifestyle and our health is a priority. And teaching kids how to live that way is, I see it as a benefit because you're teaching them habits and developing those habits, ingraining it in them at a very young age that, like we talked about before, that adults have to start learning now in their adult life because their health
Mm-hmm.
isn't the best or their metabolism is slow and all those sorts of things. So yeah, I mean, yes, type 1 diabetes is a struggle for parents and children, but there's a lot of lessons in there that can be learned through managing that disease and managing your health to live a long, healthy life. And the fact is, some people have severe issues with diabetes, and this is just a cold hard fact. Some people have severe issues. Knock on wood, my wife has not had any of those issues other than her eyes. She has diabetic retinopathy, but that didn't come till she was, a lot older. But she went through her whole life living a pretty much normal life. She had no complications. She didn't pass out. She didn't have any of those kinds of things. She had fluctuations in blood sugar from time to time, which is normal. So I say that because yes, there are differences out there where kids can really have severe issues and struggles and challenges with type 1 diabetes, but the better you are at maintaining living a healthy lifestyle and teaching them those fundamentals, those basics to controlling diabetes, the better off you're going to be with your health and avoiding the challenges that can happen from type 1 diabetes. So
Absolutely. And it also comes down to in just to build on that, also thinking about like how you're framing it with the kid. Meaning if you're like, oh no, like you can't eat that cake because you're type 1 diabetic versus like, well, maybe you shouldn't eat as much because like we want to be healthy.
right.
And so just the language that you're using, how you're framing it, instead of like the diabetes being a scapegoat and being like, oh, well, now I'm burdened with this thing. It's like, no, not we're actually trying to go this way. We're trying to, we, the collective we, our family, like we're trying to be healthy. And so like doesn't mean we can't, but we're just not going to as much.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. One more question, then I'll let you go. When I think about us as parents, I'm specifically talking to you because you have type 1 diabetes and you have two very young active kids. And now obviously they're young, so they may not fully understand it. But how much of a challenge, or has there been a challenge being a type 1 diabetic and having two very active young kids? What kind of challenges have you faced as a type 1 diabetic in being a parent?
So I mean there are the times where like when my daughter and son were super young and they're like pulling on the cord of my pump, not knowing what, what that is. And so like having to wrestle that from them. There are times where it's like, hey, we're going to go for a walk after breakfast. I'm like, okay, cool. So like I eat, my food and dose my insulin accordingly. And then it's like 45 minutes later, we're getting out the, starting to get out the door because, it's a wrestling match, trying to get socks and shoes on. And meanwhile, like my blood sugar is just going up and up and up and up. And I'm like, okay, can I get somebody with more than like an 18-month-old and 3-year-old brain to help me get out the door now. So those things, or it'd be like, hey, I don't think we're gonna go for a walk, and then all of a sudden, we go for a walk, and then a little stroll turns into like a 45-minute or an hour walk, and I can just feel myself dropping. So the biggest things are with the kids. There are so many unexpected things. There's so many things that you just don't expect to come up that you're not able to control because of, what they're wanting or not wanting to do, their emotions and stuff like that. The sleep disturbances didn't seem to have a big effect on me, knock on wood. My daughter was an amazing sleeper. My son was the opposite of an amazing sleeper, like the literal opposite, as far away from an amazing sleeper as you could get. Fortunately, it didn't have like that big of an effect on my blood glucose levels. So that was pretty great. But yeah, the biggest challenges I feel like I face is when I'm in my own bubble, like I can control what happens on a moment to moment basis. When the kids get involved, it's learning how, like, trying to think even more ahead, trying to plan even more ahead. And then this is where the communication with my wife becomes really important, to be like, okay, cool. Like, what's our plan for after breakfast? Okay, we're going to go for a walk. Okay, cool. Are we going to the close park? Are we going to the far park? Are we breaking out the bikes? Like, what are we thinking? I'm open to whatever, but like, and so then we'll start asking the kids then, and then they'll give their input. It's like, okay, cool. Now I have a plan. And then also knowing that at any moment that plan could change. So kind of hedging, my actions accordingly. That's been the biggest learning curve for me.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because my wife, has those same issues. When our boys were, growing up in their teenage years, they played sports and just going to their basketball games. I was coaching, so I'm across the stands from her. She's at the games, sitting in the stands watching the boys, and the games, they go their time or maybe a little bit longer, or we're sitting there a little bit longer, or I'm talking to parents, so she's having to wait, those kind of things. And what happens is there have been times where because she thought she adjusted what she needed to adjust to make sure her blood sugar was great. But as time goes on, she could feel her blood sugar dropping and dropping. And it's like, there were times where she'd have to come, hey, my blood sugar is starting to drop. We got to go.
Sure.
So there were things that we did to change that. So she carried, fruit snacks with her.
Yeah.
So she would carry little packages of fruit snacks in her purse. I always had a stash in my glove box. Nice. So if we were on the road and she felt herself getting lower, she'd take the fruit snacks. She keeps a little set of fruit snacks next to her in the nightstand next to the bed, in case anything comes up in the middle of the night. But when we're out at activities or doing stuff, we don't know what's going to change. We don't know how the schedule is going to be impacted, and it could impact the time that we are there and doing stuff. So she has to think ahead. Like you said, she has to think ahead. Okay, well, if anything happens and it delays or we get delayed and we're not able to do this, I'm going to have to prepare for, not that she wants it to happen, because trust me, and you can ask Charlie, trust me, being low, you do not feel great. And it's just a miserable feeling and you don't want to be there.
Right.
So when my wife would feel that she's getting low, it was like she already planned ahead, so she knew what she was doing. So that can be a challenge. Nice. And for you, it's going to be that challenge because you've got those kids that are young, they're active, and as they get older and get more involved in different things, your schedule is just going to go crazy. And I'm sure that happens with you with clients too. You have to plan ahead for clients as well.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe meetings go on. We've been talking now for almost an hour, and he's probably like, "Okay, Bryan, hurry up because I got to make sure that I keep my." No,
you're good. You're good.
No,
you're good.
No,
right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So for parents that are type 1 diabetics and having young kids or kids in general, just a family in general, you have to learn to plan ahead and be prepared for anything that could happen when it comes to your blood sugar.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I also think it speaks to the importance of being able to communicate with your partner or spouse and just say like, hey, like I need 10 minutes to take care of this, or
That
making
happens
sure
to
that
us all the time.
yeah. Yeah. And then beyond and beyond those moments being like, hey, like I need 30 minutes because I gotta get out. I gotta work out today because we've been stuck inside all like we thought we were going for, we're not, like I gotta go do something. So being all right, like with that communication and having those conversations, that's been a really big thing as well.
Yeah, there have been many a times where it's been like we're trying to get out the door and her pump's going off and she looks at it and goes, I got to change my pump. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, so that
Yep.
just, it's only a few minutes, but
Sure,
it's
but
just it
still, it's
just throws
something.
a wrench into what we had planned or scheduled. Or the same thing with we decide, my wife and I like to go for walks together. We go down to the beach and we walk along the
Nice.
boardwalk, and there are times when we're getting ready to head out the door and we're all ready to go, and it's like, I am low right now and I do not feel
Mm-hmm.
good. I need to sit for a minute and get my blood sugar back up before we head out the door because I just don't want to
Yep.
be miserable. So
Yep.
that just happens. It's just part
Mm-hmm.
of life. And I feel bad that she has those things happen, but she's a trooper, and it's that communication. I understand
Mm-hmm.
what she's going through. She can't control it. She would prefer that it not happen, but this is our life and we've accepted it and we partner up and I help her manage through it as best she can. So if she's got something she's got to do, comes to changing the pump or fixing her blood sugars, whatever that may be, it's like, all right, I'm cool. Do what you need to do
Nice.
because it's
Yeah.
part of our life. So and
It's
my boys
awesome.
know that too. Well, awesome. Charlie, for my listeners, viewers, if they wanted to learn a little bit more about you, look you up, all those
Yeah.
sorts of things, best place for them to do that.
Definitely. I'm most active on Instagram. It's just my first and last name at Charlie Cates, CharlieCates, Cates with a C. Yeah, that's definitely where I'm most active, most responsive to messages and stuff like that. You can find out more about, like all of the work that my wife and I do. We have a website that's really tailored towards kind of our online presence, which is exerciseforlifestudios.com, www.exerciseforlifestudios.com. That's where you can find out more about our podcast, our book, everything that we offer in that regard. And yeah, so those are the two places for us.
Awesome. Well, listen, you and I obviously have become pretty good friends over the last few months, and I'm looking forward to continuing that friendship and watching your kids grow up. I feel like I know them,
Thank
even though
you.
I've never met them. I feel
No,
like I
thank
know
you.
them just from hearing you and talking to you. But just keep doing what you're doing, man. That you're out there
Appreciate it.
making an impact not only in other people's lives through you and your wife's fitness program and
Mhm.
gym, but also making an impact with your kids and being intentional with them. So
Oh,
keep up the good work, my man. If there's
yes,
anything I
sir.
can do for you, you always know where to reach me.
You bet.
But thank you very much for being on.
No, thank you, Brian. This was truly a pleasure. A pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, guys, this has been another episode of Dad Up. If you want to look up Charlie, learn a little bit more about him, maybe you want to check out what he does. He and his wife do work with clients online as well. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, you can check out his website. It's all in the show notes. And if you want to reach out to him, you can obviously do that through the website, but you can do it through an Instagram too, through the DMs. Charlie's very active on DMs. So if you have questions, maybe it's with fitness. And if it's not, maybe it's with just being a diabetic. If you're a
Mm-hmm.
diabetic and you have questions, maybe you were just diagnosed or your child is just diagnosed, feel free to reach out to him because I know that he would love to help you through it and provide any guidance he can do that for you in the DMs. He's very active, as I said. So as always, I really appreciate you guys checking out the podcast this episode. Make sure you guys are subscribed to his podcast as well as mine. And if you're not yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, please make sure you do that so you don't miss any of the awesome guests that I have on each and every week. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of Dad Up. Wow, another amazing episode in the books. So much was shared, and I'm truly grateful my guest was able to pour into you to help you elevate your dad game and really dad up. Make sure you bang that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And while you're here, please don't forget to leave me a rating and a review. I always appreciate the feedback. And one last thing, don't forget, Your role as a dad is one of the most important roles you have. So if you need a little help or have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website at daduptribe.com or at my Instagram page at daduppodcast. Until next time, everyone, dad up.